Welcome to the Ohio Adult Allies Podcast Season 2, where we are developing, inspiring, and empowering youth leaders. In this episode, we discussed strategic planning versus strategic justification.
Welcome to the Ohio Adult Allies Podcast. My name is Holly Raffel, and I am excited to be here today with Blonde Hill and Beth Dixon as we explore strategic planning and strategic justification. But before we get started, I think it's important for all of our listeners out there that we tell a little bit about who we are. As I mentioned, my name is Holly Raffel, and I work at Ohio University's Boynton School of Leadership and Public Affairs. And I've been involved with the Ohio Adult Allies initiative since its inception. So it's been such a privilege for me to be part of this and watch it grow. But my first initiation into youth-led prevention was when I was in high school in the late 80s and early 90s, when I was part of a youth-led prevention program that was actually called peer counseling way back in the day. So it is so nice for my career to come full circle and to be able to have these conversations with adult allies like you, Blonde and Beth. Blonde, could you tell us a little bit about yourself, where you work, and your relationship to youth-led?
Yeah, so again, my name is Blonde Hill. I work for Youth to Youth International, and I run a youth advisory board that is with the Montgomery County Prevention Coalition. So we are the youth portion of the coalition for Montgomery County.
Absolutely. Thank you. Welcome. Beth, could you tell us a little bit about yourself and what your role is with youth-led, or maybe your history with it?
My name is Beth Dixon, and I work at Wellspring in Springfield, Ohio. I'm a BOTFIN educator, a PACS partner, and I'm also the adult ally for BATS, which stands for Bringing Awareness to Students. This is a youth-led program in Clark County.
Thank you. Welcome, Blonde and Beth. I'm so excited to have you here today, and I'm so excited for our listeners to hear the experiences and expertise that you have in regards to strategic planning. So I'm going to start it off because in youth-led, there's a lot of times this tension, if you will, between strategic planning and strategic justification. And that's really what I want to explore today. Beth, I know you've been doing a lot of thinking about this. So to start us off, can you tell us what, in your framework, in your mind, how do you view strategic planning?
I think strategic planning is a lot like building a puzzle, a jigsaw puzzle. So the goals are the same, both are about change, both are about taking a lot of pieces and creating change. And in both cases, you start with the end in mind. So I think that strategic planning and puzzling, puzzling could be a metaphor for strategic planning. Most of the time when we're building a puzzle, we consider the number of pieces before we begin, and we consider the space that we're building our puzzle in. So we're sort of assessing and building capacity. We organize our pieces. We, divide them out by color. And most people who are good puzzlers will create a border and then begin puzzling. And that keeps us focused on the inside of the puzzle. So assessing and building capacity, all of these things that are a part of, building a jigsaw puzzle is the way I see strategic planning.
Thank you so much, Beth. Now, Blonde, could you kind of walk us through what strategic planning looks like in practice?
Yeah, of course, the first thing I thought about, was the strategic prevention framework. Being in this world of prevention, that is something that I always joke and say is kind of pounded in your head. So you start to live by it. And with me running our youth advisory board, the way it looks is basically, like Beth mentioned, you're trying to assess. So you're looking at data. And with working with young people, it's a lot of active listening. So with them, sometimes giving them numbers they might not be interested in. But when you begin to listen to them and also listen to other young people and what their peers are telling them, you are assessing that data because you're hearing it's basically kind of like a focus group. So you're listening to what the problems are that they may be facing. And in terms of, building capacity, I mean, it's so important with that because you have to have that buy-in from young people. So building the capacity for them to even want to do this work, you have to have the buy-in. They have to want to be a part of this. It's something they have to be very interested in. And then in the planning process, I always joke is we try to find a way to plan and do logic models without them knowing, kind of like, this is fun, so we do this thing that's called the sticky note method, to where we use just a ton of sticky notes and what are the problems? What do you see? How do your peers feel about this? We try to make sure those activities are very interactive, colorful, to where it's something to where they're thinking about it and they don't realize, I always joke and say, you may be solving the world's problems while you're having fun at the same time. So it's just one of those things of, I always say, just make sure you're actively listening, but also make sure the young people are at a point to where this is something they're passionate about and something that they truly want to do.
Thank you so much. We've really heard a little bit about the kind of the theory or a metaphor about strategic planning, and then from Beth, and then Balan showed us what that looked like in action. So now I'm curious, Beth, can you extend your metaphor about strategic planning to strategic justification? Like, how would that look like in a puzzler situation?
Well, I guess what I think about when I think about strategic justification, I think if it were a puzzle, it would look different. It would look more like a puzzle like this, where the pieces, instead of interlocking, they just fit neatly, that somebody else has created the border for the puzzle instead of the kids. And so when it comes to youth-led, I guess, I see that strategic justification skips some crucial steps. If we were talking about a puzzle, it takes us right to implementation, and instead of the kids being the ones that are organizing those pieces or creating that border, that's been done for them by someone else.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And we really see two different types of puzzles, right? And so kind of the puzzles that we think of that have more of the box with the jigsaw versus the early childhood puzzles where you're actually just placing or putting things in, that really sets the stage for us. But I'm curious, Balan, what would strategic justification look like in the field or in practice?
Yeah, with being a part of a coalition, so the thing that I love is I'm also a part of the adult coalition, and then I run the youth advisory board. So I've seen it to where, when you're a part of a coalition, you're sitting down with a bunch of adults and you're like, we see that this is the problem that's going on with young people, and this is the source. And let's do this activity. And then they come over to me and they're like, and we want your youth advisory board to do this. And just like Beth said, you're like, well, they truly haven't come up with this on their own. So I'm presenting them a project, and it's saying, hey, we need to do this. Like, oh, the issue is vaping. So you need to do a PSA on vaping. And with that, I always say you're kind of working backwards, because then in that process, I'm trying to build the capacity. I'm trying to get the buy-in, because they didn't even know that this existed, or to them, the issue may be, for example, with my group, they're really focusing on mental health and the increasing number of young people with anxiety and depression, but then what's kind of put on them is to do a PSA on vaping. So it becomes kind of difficult because you're kind of pushing something on them. So then, like I said, I always say you're kind of connecting the dots backwards and not forward. You're connecting the dots backward because on the back end, I have to try to, like I say, build them to want to do this. And in some cases, I mean, if you work with young people, that doesn't always work, in the end. And then you might have a project that doesn't have that passion behind it because they weren't a part of the process in the beginning.
It's sort of like a means to an end, switches to an end to the means.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And that statement, Beth, really leads me to my next question. If you had to sum up the differences between strategic planning and strategic justification, how would you do that?
Well, back to the puzzle, I think that strategic planning, like a jigsaw puzzle with, 500, 1,000 pieces, it's a lot more time consuming. It's challenging. It's a time commitment. And it's a whole lot better if you have a lot of people helping you. Strategic justification is easier to jump into implementation. But to miss those important beginning steps takes something away from the process. There is less buy-in from youth. I think that youth don't get to fully appreciate the picture that they've created because part of it was created by someone else.
Absolutely. Blonde, what other weaknesses do you see in strategic justification?
I would definitely say, kind of going along with Beth, just like I said, it's one of those things to where you don't have the buy-in, but like another weakness is just looking at it like not even being able to tackle the real problem. Like if you were kind of just put something like, say, like it's like I mentioned with vaping, and just as the adults, you assume that vaping is this big problem. With me being on the coalition and serving all of Montgomery County, vaping may be a problem in one community, but it may not be a problem in the other community. So, you're doing this kind of blanket series PSA for all communities on vaping, but then you might be missing the whole root cause. So when I see with justification, you, like Beth said, you're missing that assessment. And when you're missing that assessment, you just might miss that marker. And I think that's a bigger problem because if you're truly out here, trying to make that change, you truly need that information, that data, that research, that the focus groups to make sure you do hit the marker, instead of just kind of saying, I assume that this is what's going on, or we received a grant for this, and so let's focus on this. And then that might not truly be the true problem that's going on in that community.
That was awesome.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we've had that same situation in our community where a funder or a stakeholder has a goal for youth-led, and but the youth have not been a part of establishing those root causes or looking and analyzing the data or collecting it. And so whether or not they're truly hitting the mark is questionable.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So I think you both really spoke to ways adult allies can notice that strategic justification may be going on in their process. So I have a question, and Blonde, I'd like you to kind of give some of the strategies that you have developed as an adult ally to be sure that you're not falling into the trap of strategic justification, right? So you talked about what we noticed, but then what do you do?
The biggest thing I always say is making sure you have a seat at all of those tables, at all of those meetings, be present. And it's very difficult when some of these meetings take place because they're during school hours. So the biggest thing is, the great thing of working for Youth to Youth, that was one of the biggest things, is like you're an advocate for these young people. Like you sometime when they're not in the room, you're representing them. So I try to make sure I'm always in the room to represent them. So when we have these coalition meetings or the committee meetings, and they might say, oh, we would love for the Youth Advisory Board to do that, I always stop and say, hey, let me run this by them to see if this is something they want to do. I never just jump right in and go, oh, great, we'll do it. It's always like, well, the whole point of us is we're a youth-led organization. So let me see if this is something they're interested in. And sometimes it's receptive, and sometimes it's kind of like, well, we see, well, this is what we want to do, but it's always kind of reminding those people that, the whole point of this Youth Advisory Board is to basically be the voice of young people. So if they're not seeing it from that perspective, so I would say making sure you're present or they are present. If they are there, that's even better. If they're able to be there and they're able to speak to those stakeholders. We've done advocacy day and stuff like that. And that is so powerful when they're there, when the young people are there and saying, hey, this is the problem. This is what's going on. This is what we would like to do. So just making sure they're present and making sure their voice is being heard when those decisions are being made.
Absolutely. I think what's important is that sometimes, it's not an either or, right? So it's not like strategic justification can never happen, because sometimes young people can, if they choose to do a project or play a role in a larger project. The whole empowerment model of youth-led prevention, though, also speaks to the need to do some strategic planning, right? And so Beth, what would you add to ensure that you have kind of the right mix of activities, or tell you that young people do get the opportunity to put together the whole puzzle, even though they may be called to step up if they choose to participate in a project? Can you talk about that a little bit, please?
Sure, but I have to say I loved what Balan, I just wanted to piggyback onto what Balan said. Having youth at the table is so important, and they like it. They like to attend the meetings. So, when we invite them to coalition meetings and give them something to talk about, they prepare and they're ready to speak, and people are ready to listen. And so I think that is really important. You're absolutely right, though, Holly. We can't have it, our way all the time. And especially when it comes to funding and stakeholders, and we have to be team players, right? I think making sure that your youth-led programs are balanced so that you do have some strategic planning going on and that the kids are aware of the difference. The other thing I think is, if, recently our group was asked to do some anti-vaping social media campaign work. And we went out and collected our own data to see what we came up with, to just piggyback onto what, so that there's no reason why you can't have your youth exploring those avenues on their own, even though you've been tasked with something. And maybe they'll find out something that the coalition will be really interested in. But absolutely, we make sure that the kids are involved in a variety of things so that they're tasting success. They have a chance to feel what success and pride feels like.
Absolutely. Balan, I saw you smiling. Do you have something to add?
Oh, no. When she just made, the comment of them going out to do their own research, that's a perfect example, because you are, in some cases, you don't have that, that wiggle room to kind of say, oh, no, we're not going to do that, So, and like I said, that you mentioned being a team player, like that's what it's all about. Like you said, it's the sum of all the pieces. So us being able to look, we're all trying to make that change in our community. So, the way you mentioned, just like, okay, we have this project, but the buy-in and building the capacity was like, well, let's go do our own research. So I'm like, that was a perfect example, because those are several, situations where I've been in where it's kind of like, our marijuana committee, wanted to we've done environmental scans and stuff like that. And, at first the young people were like, what is an environmental scan, but we made it fun. It's like, okay, drive around some of them drove, but when you're riding around with a parent, I said, take pictures, of the storefronts, and we were talking about signage, about how in certain communities, there's way more signage on storefronts that, promotes, tobacco use and alcohol use. And we were able to make it fun because we came back and compared those pictures. So again, that was an example where it wasn't ours, but we were able to make it fun and we got the buy-in. And again, it was just making sure we got the end result in conjunction with the coalition.
I love how you both talked about how even if you're given a project that has the outcome fixed, like vaping, young people can still get involved in the strategic planning by looking at those root causes or why young people are engaging in certain behaviors. So I think it really demonstrates that as a strong adult ally, you can take those projects with their strategic justification and add in elements of strategic planning. And I certainly appreciate your willingness to share all of this with all the Ohio Adult Allies out there. And be sure, for those of you who are listening, to stay tuned and listen to other episodes that can help you take your youth-led practice further.
Thank you for joining us today on the Ohio Adult Allies podcast. If you would like more information on our work, visit us at ohioadultallies.com. You can find more episodes on Spotify, iTunes, and other platforms by searching Ohio Adult Allies.